Okay. So now we're going to do some lengthen, shorten alterations, okay? And there are two areas that I generally focus on when I'm doing lengthen, shorten. Above the bust line and below. I generally do not recommend, unless you are altering specifically for the bust, to change anything about the bust dart and the apex. Oftentimes the lengthen, shorten alterations are really just based on height. If you're tall or you're petite and you just need to stretch the sloper to fit the length of your torso. I've seen some lengthen shortens when they, excuse me, cut through areas that I just think you don't really need to do that unless you have to. So, okay, let's start with, here, I'll do the bust front just to start. Okay, so let's just say I'm working with a client and she is 5'11". Okay, she's really tall, but she is my size if this was, a 10 sloper. So no problem. So we know the shoulders fit, we know the neck and the armhole is fine. Okay, but the whole thing is just a little bit too short. So I am going to draw a line under the armhole and above the apex. Okay. Sometimes I see this alteration and they recommend that you cut through the armhole, and it's like, if you don't have to change the armhole, don't change the armhole. You're just making a lot more work for yourself, okay? So I consider this one a main, and I call it L/S, and that's lengthen, shorten, okay? And then I also do another one about, maybe let's just go up a little bit, about halfway between the apex and the waist. Okay. And I think, Lizzie, with yours, I probably did some that was also through the armhole, but I think in that case, we actually did need to make that smaller as well. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what we did. Yeah.
Exactly.
I remember like you pinning like on the like by the bust seam, but like in the armhole, like it needed to be coming a little bit over there, so that made sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And then I'll draw this line in just for, okay, just from the upper 1/3, but I consider this top one to be posture. Okay, so if you have, forward shoulders, or I know Sky stands up really straight, I think from all the military training, that I would consider this posture. So not just lengthen, shorten, okay? All right, so we have an upper lengthen, shorten and a lower lengthen, shorten. So I'm going to split those. And then let's just go ahead and do both. May or may not need to do both depending on your client. And again, knowing that shoulder to apex to waist measurement is really important. Okay. And then use your ruler to line up all of your pieces again. Okay, so in this case, we are adding length. So this is a tall height adjustment. Okay, and I think I'll go ahead and tape these down. Sorry, that's my squeaky chair. Okay. Okay, so it's probably easier to see when it's spread, but I'll just show you as well that you can also overlap these. Okay, so I like to show this example as, spreading, but if you had a petite client, then you can cut those pieces apart and then just reduce them. Okay, so it would take away the length. And then this case that I'll tape down, this example, excuse me, we will elongate the torso. Okay, more tape. And I guess I'll exaggerate this since it's in scale. I'm going to put a 1/4 inch in between. That's probably more than, you know, a regular person would need. But certainly for scale in this example, it's easier to see it with a little bit more space in there. Okay, and then I will redraw my center front line. And then I will true up my dart. And in this case, I'm just going to go from the dart endpoint down to the opening of the dart leg. Because we weren't really altering the dart. You know, we didn't need to make it wider or narrower or do any kind of bust adjustment. It just needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Okay. And then I will also, and again, using my dart legs and the side seam at the waist and the side seam at the underarm, and true up my side seams. And in 1/4 scale, it's a little harder to see that. I think if you were in full scale, it would be a little easier to see how you need to true that up. It's just like a really slight angle here. Okay, but we did not change our apex. We did not change the bust dart. All we did was add length. And this is quite a bit of length. So this person, this nice lady, is 6'4". I don't know, probably pretty tall. Okay, so that's the front. And then we're going to come across here and do the back. You know, and just to be consistent, I will measure and say, okay, right, that was a little bit more than 3/4 of an inch. Or how did I do it from the center front? Yep, that was 3/4 from the center front. So let's do 3/4 from the center back. Okay, and then this was like a 1/4 inch beneath the armhole at the side seam. Okay. Oops, let's shifted that. Okay. And then also going through the upper 1/3 notch in the armhole. Again, I'm just going to call this one posture. Okay, and I know I generally, like I said, consider this posture, but on Lizzie's fitting, I did take some length from up here as well, but then we kept track of that in the armhole because I knew once we reduced length through this posture area that you are now making the armhole smaller as well, and then that's going to change how the sleeve fits. So I generally, like I said, don't recommend cutting through the armhole if you don't have to, because then you have to fix your sleeve or adjust your armhole. Okay, which actually, I don't know, there's another technique I can show you for that as well, like a shortcutty one, but okay. So I have this, and then I'm just going to cut through my back. And then line up my ruler here and tape my pieces down. And again, I'm going to spread these about 1/4 of an inch just so it's a little easier to see. Okay, and then I will reconnect the center back. And then on the side seam here, I'm going to just redraw again from the side seam at the armhole and the side seam at the waist. And then true up the dart from the dart endpoint to the dart leg. Well, the dart leg endpoint, of course, here. Yep, big dots. Okay. Okay, so that is just a really basic, just width, excuse me, length, adding length without changing the armhole. Okay, let me call them back. Okay. Actually, sorry, let me mute. Let me pause for a second. Okay, so I'm going to show you another technique as well for lengthening and shortening and not messing up your armhole. Okay, I'm just going to do this on a back piece, and you can watch it first, and then you can catch up if you need to. I know I'm kind of adding this one in, but I'm going to just cut this out. And actually, I can pause. I don't need to record this part. Okay, so let's see. Okay, this is another way of doing lengthen, shorten on the back. And then I am going to go through maybe the halfway point here at the armhole. Okay. And then I know in Lizzie's case, we took in some length below the darts and then again at the bottom. So this is similar to what we did for Lizzie's bodice. Okay. Right. So it was okay that we took in the sleeve on hers, but what if I really needed length taken out from here, but I did not want to change the armhole? Okay, if you're working with a pattern that has seam allowance, this works really well also. But what I'm going to do is actually cut away or trim carefully under here, the lower portion of my armhole. Okay, and I'm going to leave that connected to the top. And then I'm going to cut across here. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and cut the lower one as well. Okay. And then I guess for Lizzie's, we shortened it, but this works as well for lengthening too. Let me just show you what this looks like. So, well, no, I guess it works better for shortening. It's the same difference if we were to lengthen it. Okay. So for Lizzie's, I'm going to overlap here. Okay. And then I'm going to overlap the bottom. All right. And then what I've done with the armhole is that the armhole now is just going to cut a little bit lower into the side seam, but we have not changed the curve of the armhole. Okay, so we took that whole armhole curve and it basically just got to stay intact. Okay, we didn't cut through it. So basically, yes, underneath here, sure, you're gonna maybe have to trim out a little bit more on the side seam. Okay. But again, this is if you're doing a petite alteration and the sleeves are just fine and you don't need to change the armhole. All right, so I'm going to overlap those. Let me see, maybe 1/8 of an inch again. Okay. Yeah, and leaving the armhole intact, that's really nice and convenient too when you're working with a pattern that you bought, and you want to make sure that it stays, even with the sleeve, so you don't have to alter your commercial sleeve pattern. If you're making your initial sloper, then you would expect some alterations on the sleeve. So, but this is just a nice little time saver. Okay, and then let me reduce underneath here. Again, let's take out about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'll just tape down that little strip of underarm there. Okay, and then I'm going to go back and true up the side seams again. Excuse me. And then, excuse me, true up my darts. Okay, that dot looks a little bit big. Let me take that out so it's not distracting. Okay. Okay, there we go, nice and clear. Okay, does that make sense? Did you guys understand that one?
Yeah, except could you repeat what you did to the armhole again? I was like multitasking.
Yeah, right. So let me untape it just a little bit so that I cut away. And if this is full scale, maybe just a 1/2 inch worth of the, my tape. I don't know if it's going to let me take the tape back up.
You don't have to. You don't
I was
have
going to say, I think it'll rip if I try to take it back up. But basically, I cut just almost the line work. And if you're in full scale, maybe a 1/2 inch of this, this lower underarm curve. Okay. So I cut that out and I lifted it up and moved it out of the way. And then I slashed through here, reduced it, and then I put that armhole curve back down.
Oh, wow.
So that I've maintained that shape of the armhole the entire time. And there was a little bit of extra, pattern paper here on the side seam at the armhole, so I could trim that away. But basically, the armhole is now just a little bit lower on the side seam as a result of doing that kind of shortening petite adjustment.
Thank you.
Yeah. And like I said, now your sleeve still fits. So, okay, so this is bodice back. Right, bodice back, shorten length without changing the armhole. Okay. Great. Okay. And then I also just want to talk about, I don't know if we even really have to make a sample for these, but I wanted to talk about just basic, sizing or basic alterations where, if your garment is a little bit too small, you can just kind of simply add to the side seam. But I feel like there's limits to that, that you don't want to keep adding and adding and adding so much to the side seam that your darts end up in the wrong place and you basically have like a size 8 garment in the middle, and then you just kind of wrapped it around to make it into like a 14 or something. So there are times when if you're really having to change a pattern more than, I'd say 2 or 3 inches, that you certainly on the side seam, I wouldn't add more than a half, maybe 3/4 of an inch to the side seam to enlarge it. Otherwise, you need to start doing almost like grading to increase the size proportionately and not just at the side seam. I think this makes a little bit more sense with the skirt. So let me show this on a skirt piece. Okay, so we have a skirt. This also works for a bodice, but let me show you what I mean. So I have this awesome skirt and I just need to let it out. And I'm going to draw just 1/4 of an inch just so that you can see. Okay, because this would be letting it out. If it's 1/4 inch in scale, like an inch. So this would be like a 1 inch alteration here, but then it would increase the entire garment by 4 inches because it's 1 inch on front and back, left and right for 4. Okay, I would definitely not do more than an inch because what's going to happen if you did, let me show you. Let's add another 1/4 inch. So I'd be letting it out a lot. Right. So now what's starting to happen is that your darts are no longer in the right place. Okay. If you only just keep adding on to the side seam, just on and on and on, you're going to lose the shaping of your garment. I mean, if it's something just a lightweight, flowy chiffon or something, it wouldn't matter as much. But if you're actually making like a fitted skirt, you can't just keep adding on forever. And let me illustrate this so that if you were to do that and we let it out, and this is our skirt. Okay, maybe not the best waistline illustration here. If that's the center front, then eventually what's going to happen is if you keep adding on and adding on and adding on, then your darts are going to be too close to the middle because you've just kept on adding on to the side forever and ever and ever. Okay. So that what we want to see instead, even if you add on, you want to make sure those darts stay evenly displaced around the body, so that evenly placed, so that you have one, like, breaking this up into thirds, basically, and not quarter, half. Right, does that make sense? How you have your darts, how you have the darts spread out, so that if you're altering your pattern like this and you just keep adding on to the side, then you have 2 little darts close to the center front and you're not getting any of that nice shaping evenly distributed around the front of the skirt, as opposed to, having your darts even. So they would be in 1/3 sections around. Okay. So instead of, I'm going to put a big X on this one, don't keep adding forever. And I have seen that on YouTube and they recommend, oh my gosh, to fix your skirt, just let it out on the side. And then I see plus size ladies wearing skirts that are just a solid, huge strip on the sides and 2 little dinky darts in the middle. That's just not flattering and kind of incorrect. Okay, so let me cut this one loose.
Should we cut out one too?
Sure. I showed you guys how to do it wrong first. And then we'll do one that's right. If you have your templates and just want to trace off, that's fine as well. Okay, so let's keep our measurements even. Okay, so let's say to this one piece, we know we need to add 1.5 inches, okay, in width. Okay, so instead of adding all that 1.5 inches just on the side seam, I want to distribute it evenly. Or even if you're doing alterations sometimes, and even if it's a small amount, sometimes I like just spreading those two darts apart instead of just adding it onto the side seam, because it just looks more proportional to the body, okay? And then the shaping that you can achieve in the skirt with the darts is not just stuck at the center front. Okay, so if I know I want to add 1.5 inches, of course, this is all in scale, but that divides easily into 3. So if it's a small alteration, you don't have to add a whole lot. I would recommend just slicing the skirt in half between the darts and adding it there. If it's more than 1/2 inch for the side seam, okay? And then let me tape this down. Okay, and then I'm going to spread 1/4 inch. It's kind of a lot, you know, but it, like I said, it's a little bit easier to see in small scale. All right, so I've added in the middle here. And then I can still add some to the side seam. And then I can also add some to the center front. Okay. So I know I would probably add a little bit less on the center front because it is going to be double. But I kind of like how this looks here. So then this will keep our darts nice and even, okay? So that our dart spacing stays the same across the fullness, so that there's dart shaping that's going to end up here and here and not just right at the front. Okay. So don't be tempted to only do all of your alterations on the side seam. I think that's the whole point of the lesson, because eventually it will distort the shape and fit of the garment. And like I said, that's really popular on YouTube to just add it to the side seam, but you have to do a little bit more than that to keep it from going flat.
Miss Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when it's an already made skirt or dress and the dress doesn't fit your customer? Would you just take out on the side seam?
Yes, if you have any. That's the tough thing about manufactured, like ready to wear. Everything is serged, so you may not even have any fabric to let out anywhere. If you
Yeah.
do, yeah, for sure, just let it out anywhere you can. But if you're in like patterning stage or sloper fitting, then I recommend just doing it like the proper way. And I just hope if you are altering ready to wear that there's any kind of seam allowance in it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And spending like 2 hours unpicking serging to preserve the last little tiny bit of seam allowance that you have rather than just cutting it off. Yeah, ready to wear. You can always take it in, but it's really tricky to take it out. You know, sometimes if there's like a matching belt or like a sash or something, I'll use that kind of fabric, you know, to piece, you know, the side seams or the center back. I've done that before. If you're lucky and they need a hem as well, then you can cut off of the hem and then also sew that into the side seams or the center back. If they love the dress so much that they're willing to, you know, have bits of it pieced, you know, back together to fit them. So.
Miss Dawn,
Mm-hmm.
to piggyback off of Lizzie's question, with alterations on ready to wear, other than taking in or possibly letting out, depending on the seam allowance, is there much that we can do? Like, say, like if
Okay, hang on just a second. Let me just pause here.